The last player in the NBA to use an underhand foul shot was Hall of Fame forward Rick Barry. He believes that many players would benefit from this shot, which is modeled by this function. So you know, Rick, he was sitting around. He's like, oh, I just had this awesome shot. I'm going to make a mathematical model for the shot that I use. So he probably recorded himself and is like, oh, yeah, like obviously this is the function that represents that, right? Makes perfect sense. Okay, so here's the pieces we need to know. We need to know that h is the height of the ball above the floor, and x is the distance of the ball in front of the foul line, and v is the initial velocity in feet per second. So add that little v there. Okay, so let's take a look at A, and we have two numbers, 10 and 15, and we need to figure out what those two numbers go along with. So what does this 10 feet belong with? Height, all right? This is 10 feet above the floor of the hoop, so that's our height. Okay, what about this 15 feet? This is our distance, so that's going to be x, so distance in front of the foul line. And then what's our goal? Determine the initial velocity. Okay, so we're looking for v there. Okay, that's what we're trying to figure out. So we're just going to do what? Yeah, we're just going to plug in what we have. So at first glance, you're like, oh my gosh, like this looks pretty intense. I've got this big equation, but really it's just substitution and solving. So we have h is 10 equals negative 136 times the quantity 15 squared over v squared plus 2.7 times 15 plus 3.5. Okay, now you might want to actually take the time to use your calculator and see if you can figure this out. Because not everybody was able to. There's just a few places where there's some room for error, so you might want to practice that before we go through it together for the answer. So get your calculators out. And then when we combine these two, what do you get? What would you guys do next to solve? Good. Subtract 44 from both sides, so then we're going to get negative 34 equals negative 30,600 over v squared. Then what would you do? Perfect. You're going to multiply both sides by v squared. So we get negative 34v squared equals negative 30,600. And then the final step, well, second to final. So now we have v squared equals 900. When you were solving, okay, we would take the square root of both sides, but then what are my possible answers? Plus or minus 30, okay? So which one do we need to use here? Plus or minus? Plus, but why? All right, why do we even have a choice? Positive or negative velocity? We get v equals 30, so that's 30 feet per second. But why not negative 30? Why positive 30? Anybody remember? Because it's going forward. He's throwing the ball, right? his initial motion, it's going in a forward direction, or you could also think he's going up, right? Because if he's shooting the ball, it's starting by moving up. This would be positive. And then what would happen at the top? So we have a positive velocity. What is the velocity right here? This would be 0. And then what are all these velocities? Negative, yeah. So the velocity might be changing, but the idea is the reason why we're choosing positive 30 is because this is the initial velocity and it's moving in a positive direction. And then if the ball were falling, then we would use negative 30. But since it's the initial velocity, we know it's going to be moving up in an upward motion first. Okay? Speed is always positive, but velocity is just speed with direction, so it could actually be negative. All right? So now what we want to do is write a function for this. So all we're going to do is use this velocity that we talked about here, and we're going to plug it in to h of x. So you get h of x equals negative 136 x squared. Velocity squared is 900 plus 2.7x plus 3.5. And then after you substitute, you just want to go ahead and simplify anywhere that you can. So we are able to simplify this, but we're going to leave it in fraction form. That's going to be h of x equals, can anybody math frac this for me? I don't have it memorized. $34, you said? Okay, thanks. And then the rest stays the same. Okay, so this is going to be our answer for part B. And then for the last one, what is the only thing we need to do? We're trying to determine the height of the ball. And what information do they give us? And this 9 feet in the front of the foul line stands for what variable? So they're giving us x is 9, and we just want to find h of 9. And so we can just plug it into this formula that we have. Why don't you guys type that in and let me know what you get. What'd you get? What'd you get? Nothing? Yep. 15.56. What are the units? In this case, since we're only looking for the height, it's just going to be feet.